Hey there. Today I'm going to share with you a surefire way to find the deeper meaning in your life stories. What's the point of reflecting on our lives if we're not going to be looking for what's been meaningful? I'm Joanna Klein. I'm the creator and facilitator of Journey to Legacy, an online life story writing course for people who want to write their life stories for themselves and their loved ones. We use life story writing as a way to help you feel good about the life you've lived, the years ahead, and the legacy you have to leave behind. Now, I offer a lot of tips and exercises on my videos. So if you like what you see, please subscribe and you'll be notified when new videos appear. And I have a free gift, so make sure you stay to the end. So you've been thinking about writing your life stories. Maybe you've started and stopped, or maybe you're still dabbling with it a little bit and just feeling like something is missing. Well, one of the things that's so important to keep in mind when you're writing your life stories is that it doesn't have to be as overwhelming as we may think. And I think a lot of times, one of the reasons it feels so overwhelming is because people often confuse it with memoir. So, memoir is written from the writer's perspective about their life, but it's usually about a particular theme in their life or a portion of their life. And with memoir, tutorials that are available are really emphasizing the importance of writing a compelling story for the purpose of finding people who want to buy it. So the compelling story is going to include plot, story structure, character development, dialogue, and voice. Now, I don't know about you, but that puts a lot of pressure on me as someone who doesn't consider themselves a writer per se. I'm not looking to get published. My life stories I'm writing for myself, for those who follow me. And so this notion of having to do all of these things to get it right, my inner critic shows up and says, "Oh no, you're not going to be able to do that." Well, that's what I love about life story writing. Life story writing, I like to say, is for the rest of us. It's a collection of stories, and they don't have to have a particular theme. They don't have to be connected in any way. They can be about significant moments or not so significant moments in your life that you recall and that you want to get out on paper and that you think might carry something that could be meaningful to those who you want to leave a legacy to, that you want to share your who you are, your personal history with them so that they can feel connected to those who came before them. So with life story writing, the thing that's important is, if you're going to make that connection, that you do find a way to make your stories meaningful without having to go through all these requirements that are part of memoir. So how do you find the deeper meaning in those stories? Life story writing actually happens in two phases. It's the first phase is the therapeutic phase. It's where you get those stories out and you can start, to start writing and thinking about recalling the memories, what's important to you, but it's not the time to share. I'm actually really surprised about life story writing courses out there or programs that encourage you to write and then send it right away to someone who maybe has asked you to do your life story writing. I think you really should take time before you start sharing anything and start looking at your stories and diving in to see what's meaningful about them. And the reason that you want to be taking your time is because this is where you gain confidence that you have something to share. So often people will start writing their stories and go, "Well, this isn't very interesting," or they'll give it to someone to get feedback and they don't get such great feedback. And they're thinking, "Well, I'm not very good at this. I really don't know that this is going to be useful to anyone." Because the second part of life story writing is sharing, but we're only going to share it if we feel good about it. So, a surefire way to start feeling more confident about your stories is to be approaching them looking for your wisdom. What is the wisdom that you have gained over your life experience? All right, so what is wisdom? Let's make sure that we get this defined so we understand. Wisdom is the quality of having experience, knowledge, and good judgment. And wisdom is different than intelligence. Intelligence is the ability to gain and apply knowledge. So whoever it is that created the World Wide Web, now that person was intelligent. Electricity, Thomas Edison was intelligent, probably had wisdom too, but putting those concepts together, coming up with theories, inventing things, that takes a lot of intelligence. But wisdom is this accumulation of knowledge. It's also the ability to see this broader perspective, to see patterns, and see how things are all connected. And that's what we all have. Some have more than others, but we all have the ability to access it. As we age, we start to see patterns more. We start to develop greater wisdom. Now, not everyone who is older is wise, and not everyone who is wise is older, but we certainly have that ability to access it more. And in a world where there's so much disconnect, there's so much disruption, I think it's more important than ever for us to connect with our wisdom, what we've learned, and share those life experiences in a way that allows those that we care about to understand how it is that we've gained our wisdom. If we're able to do that, if we're able to connect with it, to understand it, to put it on paper and to share it, then we can make an impact in someone else's life. First Socrates says that wisdom can't be taught. Now, Chip Conley, who is the author of the book Wisdom at Work, The Making of the Modern Elder, says correct. Wisdom cannot be taught, but it can be shared. So it's through our life stories that we're able to share our wisdom. Now, Chip Conley also says something really interesting that I think emphasizes why it's so important for us to be connecting with our wisdom now. He says that in a world that is consistently more and more tech obsessed, I mean, there's knowledge, there's information at our fingertips, wisdom becomes more and more important. We are awash in knowledge, but in an increasingly AI, artificial intelligence dependent world, what is becoming more and more scarce is wisdom. So it's up to us to capture our wisdom. It's up to us to share that with others, with the younger generation who's growing up and having so much information at their fingertips, but not as much wisdom at their fingertips. And let me give you an example of how the process of wisdom can unfold through life story writing. So one of my students, I'll call her Jane, grew up in South Africa during the time of apartheid. Segregation, Black people were not allowed to go to the same hospitals, to be at the same beaches, the same restaurants. They had to carry a passport with them within their own country in order to get into cities like Cape Town. It was illegal for a Black person to marry a white person. And so this is what she grew up with. And she's writing about this experience. But something was gnawing at her. She was having a hard time identifying something that was important to her about this experience, that was a message in this experience. And so we met for one of our one-on-one sessions as part of my Journey to Legacy program. And she was saying how now when she goes to a restaurant, to a public event, she feels so much joy and happiness when she sees Black people there who are dressed up, having dinner just like the white people in the restaurant. And that brings her, there's this contentment and happiness and satisfaction that she feels. So I asked her, well, how do you feel when you think back about that time as a young girl, when you think about the segregation? And she thought about it for a minute and then said, I feel guilty and I feel shame. And with that, she connected with her wisdom. So what was happening for her is that she felt ashamed of the fact that she accepted that this was a way of life when she was young. She didn't even question it. And she felt guilt and shame as a result of it. But here's where the wisdom comes in. She's a different person now. She sees the situation differently. She recognizes the injustice. She recognizes it was wrong. And now she's able to write about that let go of the guilt and shame, have compassion for herself, but write about it from this wise perspective of life is different. And I mean, we all have times where we're oblivious to wrong in the world. So we can relate to her being oblivious to it going on at that time, and her vulnerability in admitting it, and vulnerability in admitting her shame and her guilt, but also see her wisdom now, and she knows better, and she's able to describe the situation to us in a way that helps us understand more of what was going on, helps us build compassion. And even for me, as she was sharing her story with our Journey to Legacy group, reminded me that I grew up in the South in the 1950s when there was also segregation. And I remember white only signs over the bathrooms and the water fountains at the shopping centers. So her sharing her wisdom opened up my memory. I recalled my own stories that I now get to share, and to be able to share the wisdom I have gained over the years, having lived through segregation in my own town. So the very fact of connecting with our wisdom, of being able to share it in a way through our own personal journey, can open up so much for those who receive it. First of all, the process of self-acceptance, self-compassion, as I described, but then sharing things like, in this case, history, what she lived through. Someone who hasn't lived through that can build more sensitivity and awareness and recognition of and sensitivity to what many cultures and ethnicities are living through, and sometimes history is repeating itself. So building more sensitivity in that way. So that's just one example of someone tapping into their wisdom. So my invitation to you is to recognize, first of all, you have wisdom and it's important to share it. And so you tap into that in a number of different ways. So let me give you some examples of some ways that you can tap into your wisdom. First of all, the very fact that you're looking at this is an indication that you're someone who wants to reflect on their life. And that's an important place to be in if you're going to be looking for your wisdom. So you want to be in a place of wanting, in a mindset of wanting to do self-reflection. The one thing that you can look for is patterns in your life to see how you might have developed wisdom. Maybe you repeated the same mistake over and over again. One of my patterns, for example, is that I've been married and divorced 3 times. And there was a long time where I was ashamed of that. I didn't want to acknowledge that. But through life story writing and asking myself questions, what did I learn from that? And how did I show up in those situations? What were my expectations when I look at and getting married? And yeah, each time there were different expectations, but I can now see what the patterns were in my life, and now able to spot it so that I don't make the same mistake again in entering the next relationship. Now I'm currently in a relationship I've been in now for 7 years, much healthier relationship, entering it for a whole different reason, and feeling like really my other relationships I entered with the desire to find someone to fill me up, to find my happiness outside of myself. And with my new relationship, I learned that that happiness is within. So there's my wisdom, not looking outside of ourselves to find our happiness. And here's the mistakes that I made. I'm grateful for the situations that I had. There's lots to write about that's good and let's say, valuable from those life experiences, but I'm looking for wisdom, and that's in some of the patterns that I've seen. So there's an example of wisdom within the patterns. You may have different patterns in your life. Perhaps you avoided promotions, or perhaps you were very competitive, or maybe you had patterns in terms of being a volunteer and what that meant for you, and what the wisdom was, and how is it that you ended up making the choices that you did at the places that you chose to volunteer. What did you learn about volunteering as a result? So you can find wisdom in good things, you can find wisdom in challenging things, and just knowing that you've lived through something, like who if something is different now, like if, for example, if you learn to stand up for yourself when you didn't stand up for yourself before, what did it take for you to learn to stand up for yourself? What was the journey, and where's the wisdom that you've gained in that? And by writing that story, someone else who is going to be reading it might learn to have the courage, might develop the courage because of your inspiration to learn to stand up for herself. So that's one way, looking for the pattern. So another way of finding the wisdom is asking yourself questions. Things like, what were defining moments in your life? And what did you learn from them? What were some challenges that you overcame? And how is it that you overcame them? So asking the kinds of questions from the perspective of who were you before, who were you after, and what did it take? And now looking back, who are you now? So wisdom includes good judgment, but doesn't mean that all your stories are only about good judgment. Maybe you wince when you think back to some of the things of your choices that you made, but there's a story in there. What is it causing you to wince? That's your wisdom. You know better now. So write about what it is that you did and how you would do it differently. Some more questions you can ask yourself: of what advice would you give your younger self? What are you proud of? And what did it take to make that happen? If you're proud of something, what did it take to get you there? Another way to find your wisdom is to share stories with someone else, just like Jane did with me, to share your story and say, hey, what are you hearing in here? Can you ask me any questions? Is there anything? What's the deeper meaning that you hear? What's some wisdom that's within this story? And have them ask you some questions that can help you identify your wisdom. And then the last piece of advice I have for you as far as uncovering your wisdom is to write it down. Obviously, if you're here, you've been playing around with, if you're not already, writing your life stories. And so getting it out of your head and putting it on your paper and just allowing it to flow without having to worry about the structure of it all, just writing down what's coming to you and then asking yourself, like, what's significant here? Where's the wisdom here? I hope that's been helpful for you. As I said, I have a free gift here at the end, and that's my free guide for life story writing. You can get that on my website, journeytolegacy.com, or if you want, there's also a link below. And I invite you to subscribe to this channel if you haven't already, and if you like what you see, and I look forward to having you with me next time.